Hi guys, and I'm back with another story. This is a very interesting story to me. This is a particular actor that some of you are going to definitely remember, and some of you don't, so time to learn something new. Who am I doing today? I'm going to do Bob Crane. Bob Crane was an actor very big in the 60s, actually, for a very famous television show called Hogan's Heroes. And I'm sure a lot of you watched it. It was actually one of my favorite shows. Myself and my older brother, we used to love Hogan's Heroes. But Bob Crane was born July 13th, 1928 in Waterbury, Connecticut. And he was an American actor, a drummer, and even a radio personality. He started off as a radio personality. He left Connecticut, went to New York. He was doing radio as well as doing work as a DJ. And that was going good for a while. But in the 60s, he got kind of tired of being in New York, and he moved back to Connecticut, where he only stayed for a short time, and then he ended up going out to LA. When he went out to LA, he auditioned, and one of his first gigs he got was the role of Colonel Robert Hogan for Hogan's Heroes. Now, if you don't know what Hogan's Heroes was, it was about a camp in World War II, a German camp, where we had these American soldiers who were captured, and they began to take over the whole camp, and they made the people, the German soldiers, think that they were in control, but actually Hogan was always in control of everything that was going on. It was quite funny, actually. And the series ran from 1965 to 1971, so it ran a really good long time. And in fact, Bob even was nominated for 2 Emmy Awards. Well, time went on, and interest in the series started to decline, and so did Robert's career. Now, his career declined because, when you play a TV role really good and you're in our home week after week after week, it's hard to shake that image and play something else. And so Bob started to go into dinner theater. And dinner theater would be, he would travel to these little towns and put on these little plays and stuff, and you'd have your dinner in the restaurant and all of that. I've been to some in Vegas. I don't know, maybe you've been to some as well. So in 1975, Hogan's Heroes was canceled. And so as Bob was doing dinner theater, he also picked up a new hobby, and that was initially photography, and then it became videotaping. And he really got, I guess you want to say, obsessed with it. So much so that he was taking videography as well as photography of females and himself in different sexual escapades. In fact, the actor Richard Dawson, who also played in Hogan's Heroes as the British guy, I'm sure you guys know. And if you don't know who Richard Dawson was, he used to be the host of Family Feud, the original host of Family Feud. And look him up, Google Richard Dawson. And Richard introduced him to a guy by the name of John Carpenter. John knew Richard because Richard would do his little sexual things. And, they had that kind of wild Hollywood life, and John was always a part of that. John was, I think starstruck is probably the best word that you could describe John. John was a salesman of electronics and camera equipment, videography equipment for Sony. And John and Bob hit it off right away. They seemed to have a lot in common. And one of the things that John really liked is because when they would be out together, Bob Crane would attract all these different women. Now, keep in mind, Bob was married. In fact, he married the girl that played the secretary in Hogan's Heroes with the blonde, the German girl with the blonde little ponytails and stuff. That's who he was married to. That was his second wife. And so John loved it because the girls would come on to Bob Crane, be so excited to meet him and to do, just spend time with him. And so that would automatically mean any extra girls would go over to John. Now, John was not the looker, but, the girls were partying and having a good time. And both the guys used to like to take the girls back to to Bob's apartment and videotape them. And they would videotape them even having sexual intercourse with all of them together at the same time. Now, everything was fine. And then, of course, after a while, Bob got kind of sick of it. It got kind of old. And he also found that John to be a little bit too clingy. For example, John ended up quitting his job at Sony as a salesman selling photography equipment. But he did keep that same work, and he worked for another company that would give him more access to travel. And so he would always make sure, John would, that his schedules matched up with Bob Crane. So wherever Bob was doing dinner theater in the Southwest, John could be there so they could hang out again. And after a while, for Bob, it just got to be too much. In fact, he even had called his son a couple of days before his murder and had mentioned that he was going to call John and let him know the friendship is over and you're going to have to stop following me around. I'm just kind of over this. Go live your life. And so the night before, that is what is supposed to have happened. Now, in June of 1978, Bob lived in apartments called the Winfield Apartments in Scottsdale, Arizona. Now, Scottsdale, Arizona at the time, and may still be to this day, I know it was like in the early 2000s, still very nice area, very, a little more upscale type of part of Arizona, not too far away from Phoenix. And so they weren't used to big crimes and all that kind of stuff. So on the early morning of June 29th, 1978, and remember that 29 is an 11, on that particular morning, Bob was actually supposed to meet one of his co-stars, a female by the name of Victoria Berry, for a lunch meeting. Well, Bob never showed up, and he always showed up for meetings, and he didn't show up, and so Victoria was worried about him. And later on in the afternoon, she went by his apartment, and she was knocking on the door, no answer. And finally, she decides to turn the doorknob, and it's unlocked. So she comes in, and it's very dark in there because of Bob working evening times. He had to sleep in the day, as well as these different video sessions that he and John would do. They had blackout curtains. So the room was really dark. It was a mess, but it wasn't a mess like it had been robbed. It was just a mess like a guy lives there. Lots of video equipment and papers and this and that strewn around. Well, Victoria is going through the apartment and she's calling for Bob and he's not answering. And she finally goes towards the bedroom, and it's even darker in the bedroom. And now she can see like the shadow of somebody in the bed. And she actually thought it was a woman in there. Maybe it was Bob's wife. She wasn't sure. When she walked up on the female or the figure in the bed, she saw that it was actually Bob Crane laying on his side as if he was asleep in a prone position with his hands like a pillow, and he was dead, just covered in blood. His face was covered. There were spatters all over the wall, and he was dead. She called the Scottsdale police. Now, the Scottsdale police were not accustomed to this types of crimes happening. So when they came into the crime scene, they came in recklessly. Although the lead detective was a female, she did close the door to the bedroom. But everyone was walking through that particular apartment. They were smoking cigarettes in there. They were touching the telephones and tables and everything. So there were fingerprints of them all over the place. Their footprints were all over the place. And so they've compromised that crime scene. In addition, the police also found an electric cord tied around Bob's neck. Not so much that it was strangling him, but it was around his neck like they were going to do that. And then they decided to bash him. On the bed sheet, there was a marking, and it looked as if it was maybe a tripod. They were trying to figure out what weapon was used to bludgeon him to death. And one of the detectives went and got an extra tripod that was in the living room and laid it and lined up perfectly. But you've got to keep in mind, at that time in 1978, they did not have any DNA testing. So on July 5th, 1978, Bob was buried. Now, the Scottsdale police were trying to put a case together. They wanted to find who did this, and they wanted to try them. The problem was Scottsdale police just were ill-equipped to handle this investigation. They did see that there was no forced entry. Nothing had been stolen from the place. And the fact, like I said, the police walked through the crime scene. They were smoking in the crime scene. It ended up that the Maricopa County attorney decided to not try the case because they didn't have any weapon. Nobody broke in, and they were just sort of going to let it die away, become a cold case. And it did. It wasn't until 1990 that they reopened the case to try to find out what happened to Bob Crane. And what started that was one of the original female detectives got with a new detective that came on to the force, and they started going through the old files, and they found a picture that was inside of John Carpenter's car, and it was a piece of brain matter, and they were determined that because it was a picture, but because they had taken it to some medical experts and they determined what it was, and they examined it up close, they even saw hair pieces on it. Unfortunately, that piece of evidence was missing and to this day has never been found. They don't know what happened to that piece of evidence. They just had the picture. And so at that time, they tried to do a DNA test, but when they did the DNA test of the different blood samples that they had gathered from Bob Crane's apartment, the only blood on there was from Bob Crane. And that's because he would have gotten bludgeoned versus, stabbed where someone else could have gotten cut. They did, it after 4 years, take the case to court to try the case. And at that point, that is when Bob Crane's son took the witness stand and said that his dad, Bob Crane, had talked to him a few days before his death, said that he was absolutely tired of John Carpenter. He found him a nuisance and obnoxious and a hanger-oner, and he had told his son that he had intended to tell him the friendship was over, and that he had called him actually and told him that the friendship was over and stop bugging me and all of that. Now Carpenter's defense attorney said that, first of all, how can they say John Carpenter did this when there was no weapon, when they had no DNA of John Carpenter, because now at this point they could test for DNA, but they had nothing in there that had John Carpenter's DNA on it. The defense attorney suggested that it could have been one of the women that they had videotaped who didn't know, even though some of the women did know they were videotaped, some did not. But he said it could be one of those. It could be the husband or the boyfriend of one of the women that they videotaped who could have gotten angry and decided to do this. They also mentioned that Bob Crane had been in a very violent argument with another actor. It could have been him. They gave up all kind of people. And then the judge in the case told the jury they did not have to consider the picture of the brain matter and the police's theory that it was a tripod, because they didn't have the tripod. They just had the stain on the cover that looked like it could be the shape of the tripod. I've seen it. It looked like a tripod. But anyways, they were told they did not have to consider it, and the jury did not consider it. And ultimately, John Carpenter was acquitted. So now I want to just take a crack at it and take a look at some information and see who did this crime. I first want to look at Bob Crane, and Bob's birthday was July 13th, 1928. And that 13 in the middle tells me something. Now Bob had been married twice, but he's got a 13. That tells me that he thought of himself as independent and single, not as a married man, even though he had children and he had had 2 wives. The one, like I said, who had been one of the stars on Hogan's Hero, he was still married to. But he liked to be with women that were a lot of fun. He wanted women that were bubbly and fun, number 3 type women that like to party and kick their heels up and all of that. That's what he enjoyed, rather than the responsibility of being a husband. And maybe that was his downfall. And now when I look at the year that he was murdered in 1978, that put him in a number 8 year. So his birthday was on July. He could have very well had a terrific year or a bounce back from his death. bounce back from his career, he could have had a job being a number 8 year personal year. He could have had a tremendous resurgence of his career. He didn't live long enough for that. That number 8 personal year also would have made him a very harsh person towards John or anyone else. That's why he called him up and said, "You're a nuisance, you're a hanger-oner, you're obnoxious." He would have said all those things. That 8 year tends to make people sharp in their tongue, sharp in dealing people, extremely bossy, controlling. Not to mention the fact that Bob Crane was a number 4 lifestyle. So he liked exacting of things or perfection of things. So that meant that if John didn't film right or didn't have the power chords right or any little thing that he would have done, Bob Crane would have been all over him because he was a perfectionist. Also, I'm looking at Bob Crane's chart, and this was destined to happen to him. He had destiny in his chart. It was going to happen, whether it was John Carpenter or somebody else. This was going to happen, and it was going to be public issues because, like the defense attorney had said, he'd had a very public row with someone in a bar, another actor, and that was public. His death and being found out all his hidden fetishes, that was public. His rising is in Libra, so even though he didn't necessarily like John 100%, he would hang with him, or he would go along with him, or he'd be compromising because that Libra agreeable nature. That's why we were drawn to him or attracted to him, because he had that kind of, if you see a picture of him or the picture that we have in the video, very likable face. He had a very likableness to him. It was a tough time making clear decisions on things. Like he'd want to do this and then change his mind and do that. Just like the marriages. I want to be in this marriage. I want this to happen, but I don't know. His sun was in Cancer, so he was a very sensitive and nurturing man. In fact, he is three Cancers in his chart. So he was very sensitive, very emotional, and Venus in Cancer, Mercury in Cancer. So everything he did was based on how he felt. So if he felt this sexual urge, because he's got a Jupiter in Taurus, he's got a Mars in Taurus, he would be this sexual urge. Taurus tells me that he wanted stuff, he needed stuff, he want, and he would act out on those particular emotions. So much so he probably was depressed. He probably wasn't 100% in his right mind, meaning he probably could have took medication for things. I'm not a doctor. I'm not trying to play one on TV, but I can just tell that with all that wateriness in him, he really was not necessarily emotionally well, oversensitive, over touchy. And then he's got Saturn in Sagittarius. His South Node is in Sagittarius. He had to be free. He liked freedom and fun, and which is all good, but he took it to an extreme. When I look at John Carpenter, now here he is a Taurus, so they've got a lot in common actually. John Carpenter's birthday was April 24th, 1928, and he was a number 4 life path as well. So he also was a perfectionist and would get down on himself if things weren't just so. He liked stability. He wanted to have like one person in his life. And also his sales situation wasn't going well because he was in a personal year of 7. And that meant that everything he was doing was coming up with obstacles. And now here was this friendship that I actually think that John had feelings for Bob more so than just friends, even though Bob, not necessarily, but John, yeah, for sure. And now you're putting up an obstacle saying that this friendship isn't over. So it's already my job is not going well. That's slowed down. I'm not making the sales that I used to because he was a salesman. And now you want to stop the friendship too. Now you're hard on yourself. Okay, I'm no good. You're no good. You're judging me. You're judging yourself. It's all not good. His rising is in Leo, so that would make him have a lot of pride. Very concerned about how he looked and how people took to him. He would be a magnet for people because Leos are fun people to be around. They're very warm people, warm energy. And his rising in Leo gave you the impression that he was that way. His sun was in Taurus, so that would make him, he wanted to fixate on stuff, okay? He would fixate on anything, any situation. He wanted the best of things. He wanted a finer life. If he could have traded places with Richard Dawson or Bob Crane or any other actor in that day, he would have. That's why he was hanging on, that shine that he wanted to be around. His moon was in Cancer as well, so that's a warm, fuzzy place for him. So that would tell me that he would have great love for people that he let close to him. And if you told him to stop or back up, oh boy, he would really get upset. His Mars is in Pisces, so that made him especially sensitive and a type of person that would be in love with being in love. He would be compulsive and deceptive and someone that needed emotional security. So if Bob Crane said this friendship was over, he would be devastated and would act out of that devastation. He's got a Mercury in Aries and a Venus in Aries, so and a Jupiter in Aries. So he's Aries all the way. So he would be extremely compulsive, going after everything, getting what he wants. You know, maybe not finishing everything, but go, 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 go. And by the time he would figure out what he'd done, it's too late. When I look at them, I can see clearly that John did this. John was obsessed. John was really in love, and I'm going to say it like that, with Bob Crane. Not that either one of them was gay per se, but he was in love with him. He wouldn't have come out and said that like that, but the intimacies that they had spent together, whether there was females involved or what have you, that would have encouraged that all those feelings and all those emotions that he had. And his South Node is in Sagittarius too, which also said that he liked a lot of freedom and space and travel. So they had a lot in common. His deceptiveness would not allow him to really tell Bob, I'm in love with you, but it was like a very bad breakup. So did John Carpenter do this? Absolutely, without a doubt. He got away with murder. He wasn't responsible for the brain matter not being put in forensic evidence. It was a slop job when it came to the whole crime scene and the way the Scottsdale police handled it, allegedly. They let a lot of things slip through the cracks, a lot of things they blew off. I personally don't think the judge should have told the jury, you don't have to consider the picture of the brain matter, or you don't have to consider the theory that the prosecution is presenting about the tripod. That should have been left on the jury, but that it all happened, and it was just a big mess at the end of the day. So that's my story, guys. If you like this channel, subscribe. John Carpenter did do this, and I don't know if he got acquitted in 94. I don't know if he's ever been tried again. I don't think he's living anymore, but he had to die with the pain of that. You guys, subscribe, thumbs up, leave a comment. Tell me who you think done it. Have a great day.